Some faces you never forget, no matter how hard you try. Catherine Brennan had spent 3 years learning to live with loneliness, convincing herself that the past was truly behind her. Then, one winter evening in a small frontier saloon, she looked up and saw him, the mountain man with eyes that held secrets she thought were buried forever. He stood in the doorway like a ghost stepping out of memory, and when their gazes met, the years between them simply vanished. She whispered 4 words that changed everything. "I've seen you before." What he did next would unlock a promise made long ago and reshape both their futures. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter of 1887 came early to Silver Ridge, Montana, wrapping the small frontier town in a blanket of white that seemed to muffle not just sound, but time itself. Catherine Brennan stood at the frosted window of her boarding house, watching snowflakes drift past the lamp-lit glass like memories she couldn't quite grasp. 3 years had passed since Thomas died, and still she found herself counting the seasons by their absence rather than their presence. The boarding house had been Thomas's dream, built with his own hands from timber he'd hauled down from the mountains. 2 stories of solid pine and careful joinery. It sat on the corner of Main Street and Cedar, close enough to the heart of town to catch travelers, but far enough from the saloons to maintain respectability. 8 rooms upstairs, a dining area and kitchen below, and Catherine's private quarters tucked behind the main staircase where she could hear the comings and goings of guests without being constantly among them. She ran the place alone now, though alone wasn't quite accurate. There were always boarders, miners passing through, merchants waiting for the spring thaw, the occasional family seeking temporary shelter. But none of them knew her, not really. They knew Mrs. Brennan, the quiet widow who kept clean rooms and served hot meals on time. They didn't know Catherine, the woman who still set 2 places at her private table some mornings before remembering. The silver locket rested against her chest, as it had every day since Thomas's funeral. Inside were 2 treasures, a photograph of Thomas taken the year they married, his face young and hopeful, and a lock of his dark hair that she'd cut herself before they closed the coffin. She touched it now through the fabric of her dress, a habit so ingrained she barely noticed doing it anymore. "Mrs. Brennan," a small voice broke through her reverie. Catherine turned from the window to find Mary Sullivan standing in the doorway, all knobby knees and serious brown eyes. The girl was 10 years old, orphaned 6 months ago when fever took both her parents within a week of each other. Catherine had taken her in without hesitation, and Mary had proven herself useful beyond her years, helping with laundry and meal preparation without being asked. "Yes, dear. Mr. Patterson says he'll be leaving tomorrow if the roads are clear enough. Should I prepare his bill?" "Please do, and add an extra portion of cornbread to his dinner tonight. He's been a good tenant." Mary nodded and disappeared back toward the kitchen, her footsteps light on the wooden floors. Catherine watched her go, feeling that familiar tightness in her chest. She'd been 28 when she married Thomas, 35 when she buried him. Now she was 38, and the thought of another winter, another year, another decade of this careful, contained existence made her feel tired in a way that sleep never remedied. A knock at the front door pulled her from darker thoughts. She smoothed her skirts and went to answer it, finding Adelaide Porter on the porch, bundled in so many layers she looked twice her already considerable size. "Catherine, dear, I won't keep you. Just wanted to drop off these preserves." Adelaide thrust a basket forward, the jars inside clinking softly. "Peaches from last summer. I put up too many as usual." "You're kind to think of me, Adelaide. Won't you come in for tea?" "Can't today. Ben Hadley's wife is feeling poorly, and I promised I'd sit with her this afternoon." Adelaide paused, her sharp eyes studying Catherine's face. "You look peaked yourself. Are you sleeping?" "Well enough." "That's not an answer." Adelaide's tone softened. "Catherine, It's been 3 years. Thomas wouldn't want you living like a ghost in your own house. Catherine felt her spine stiffen. I'm managing perfectly well. Managing isn't living. Adelaide reached out and patted Catherine's hand. I know it's not my place, but someone needs to say it. You're young yet. There's still time for— Thank you for the preserves, Adelaide. The older woman sighed but didn't press further. Stop by if you need anything. Anything at all. Catherine watched her neighbor make her way carefully down the snowy steps, then closed the door and leaned against it. Young yet. The words stung more than they should have. Young for what? To start over. To forget. To pretend that the life she'd built with Thomas could simply be replaced with something new. She carried the preserves to the kitchen where Mary was peeling potatoes for dinner. The routine of it was comforting, the smell of bread baking, the warmth of the stove, the simple tasks that filled the hours. This was her life now. It was enough. It had to be enough. Sheriff Ben Hadley stopped by late in the afternoon, stamping snow from his boots before entering. He was a solid man in his 50s, with grey threading through his dark beard and a way of moving that suggested he'd been in his share of fights and won most of them. Catherine. He nodded respectfully, removing his hat. Just making rounds. Everything quiet here? Quiet as always, Ben. Good. Good. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say something more. Listen, there's been talk of strangers in the area. Drifters, maybe worse. I'd feel better if you kept your doors locked after dark. I always do. And if you see anyone suspicious, I'll send Mary to fetch you immediately. Catherine offered him a small smile. I appreciate your concern, truly, but I've been taking care of myself for some time now. Ben's expression suggested he had opinions about that, but he kept them to himself. Offer stands. Any trouble at all, you send word. After he left, Catherine found herself at the window again, watching the early winter darkness settle over Silver Ridge. The street was nearly empty, just a few hardy souls hurrying between buildings, their breath clouding in the frigid air. The Copper Bell saloon glowed warm across the way, its windows streaming light onto the snow. She rarely went to the saloon. It wasn't proper for a respectable widow, and besides, the noise and crowd made her uncomfortable. But they sold coffee, and occasionally she needed supplies that could only be gotten there. Tobacco for Mr. Patterson, playing cards for the miners, small luxuries that kept her boarders content. Tonight she realized she needed lamp oil. The supply in the storage room was lower than she'd thought, and with this cold, they'd be burning lamps well into the evening. She could wait until morning, but some restless impulse she didn't quite understand, made her reach for her heavy wool coat. Mary, I'm going across to the Copper Bell. I'll only be a moment. Should I come with you, Mrs. Brennan? No need. Keep an eye on the bread. I'll be back before it's ready to come out. The cold hit her like a physical force when she stepped outside. Her breath crystallized instantly, and the snow crunched under her boots with that particular sound it only made in the deepest winter. She pulled her coat tighter and made her way across the rutted street, carefully avoiding the icy patches. The Copper Bell was warm and loud, full of men seeking refuge from the cold and their own solitude. Catherine kept her eyes down as she made her way to the bar, where Jack Morrison, the owner, was pouring whiskey with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Brennan? He nodded, surprised but not unwelcoming. What brings you out on a night like this? I need lamp oil, Jack. 2 bottles if you have them. I do. Give me just a moment. While she waited, Catherine allowed herself to look around. She recognized most of the faces. Miners from the claims to the east, merchants from town, a few cowboys from the ranches that dotted the valley. They were playing cards, drinking, talking in the easy way men did when they had nowhere else to be. It was a world she'd never been part of, even when Thomas was alive. He'd spent his evenings at home with her, content with their quiet life together, or so she'd thought. Jack returned with the lamp oil, wrapped in brown paper. Catherine paid him and turned to leave, eager to return to the familiar safety of her boarding house. But as she reached the door, it opened, bringing with it a gust of wind and snow and something else, a presence that made the room fall momentarily quiet. The man who entered was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of stillness that came from years of solitude. His coat was made from animal hide, well worn but well maintained, and his beard was full and touched with gray. He moved like someone accustomed to mountains and forests, his eyes taking in the room with the careful assessment of a man who'd learned to evaluate threats before they materialized. And when those eyes met Catherine's across the crowded saloon, something inside her chest cracked open like ice breaking in spring thaw. She knew this man. She didn't know how she knew him or from where, but the recognition was absolute, undeniable, as certain as her own name. Her hands tightened on the package of lamp oil, and she felt the silver locket burning against her skin like a brand. The man's eyes widened slightly. He recognized her too. Time seemed to slow. The noise of the saloon faded to a distant murmur. Catherine stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move forward or back, trapped in the gravity of that gaze. Memories swirled just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. She knew this face, those eyes, that way of standing, patient and immovable as stone. Her lips moved before she consciously decided to speak, and the words came out as barely more than a whisper, yet they cut through the noise like a knife. "I've seen you before." The mountain man's expression shifted, something like recognition and regret crossing his weathered features. He removed his hat slowly, holding it in both hands, and his voice when he spoke was low and measured, carrying the kind of calm that came from long practice at choosing words carefully. "Yes, ma'am, I expect you have." The saloon had gone quiet. Men who'd been laughing moments before now watched with the keen interest of people who sensed drama unfolding. Catherine felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their curiosity, but she couldn't look away from the stranger who wasn't quite a stranger. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The package of lamp oil nearly slipped from her trembling hands. She wanted to demand answers immediately, wanted to turn and flee, wanted to do 100 contradictory things all at once. Instead, she stood rooted to the spot, her breath coming shallow and quick. The man took a step forward, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "My name is Silas Corbett, Mrs. Brennan. I wonder if we might speak somewhere private." The use of her name, her married name, sent another shock through her system. "How do you know who I am?" "That's part of what I need to discuss with you, ma'am, but not here. Not with all these ears listening." Jack Morrison leaned across the bar, his expression protective. "Everything all right, Mrs. Brennan? You want me to send for the sheriff?" Catherine's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that this moment mattered, that what happened next would change something fundamental in her carefully ordered life. She could refuse, could walk away, could retreat to her boarding house and pretend this encounter never happened. But the recognition that had flared between them was real, and she knew with absolute certainty that Silas Corbett had answers to questions she hadn't even known she should ask. "No, Jack, it's fine." She turned her attention back to Silas. "You can come to my boarding house tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock, we'll talk there." Relief flickered across Silas's face. "I'm grateful, ma'am. I'll be there." Catherine nodded once, sharply, and pushed past him into the cold night. Her legs felt unsteady as she crossed the street, and she barely registered the freezing air or the snow falling heavier now. Behind her, she heard the saloon come back to life, voices rising in speculation and gossip. By morning, everyone in Silver Ridge would know that the widow Brennan had spoken to a strange mountain man. Let them talk, let them wonder. Right now, she needed to think. Mary looked up from her mending when Catherine entered the boarding house, concern immediate on her young face. "Mrs. Brennan, you're white as a sheet. Are you all right?" I'm fine, dear. Just the cold. Catherine set down the lamp oil with hands that still shook. Is everything locked up for the night? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Patterson's in his room, and the others haven't come back yet from the saloon. Good. You should get to bed. Tomorrow's Sunday. We'll sleep a bit later. But Catherine didn't sleep at all. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows from the dying fire dance across the wooden beams. Silas Corbett. The name meant nothing to her consciously, yet something deep in her memory stirred at the sound of it. How did she know him? And more troubling, how did he know Thomas? Because he must have known Thomas. That was the only explanation. Thomas must have known this mountain man, must have spoken of Catherine, must have shared something that brought Silas Corbett to Silver Ridge 3 years after Thomas's death. She rose before dawn, unable to lie still any longer. She built up the fire, made coffee, and sat in her small parlor with Thomas's leather journal in her lap. She'd read it 100 times, knew every entry by heart. Thomas had kept it faithfully for the 5 years of their marriage, recording the small details of their life together, the weather, the progress on the boarding house, amusing incidents with guests, his love for Catherine expressed in simple, honest words. But now, as she turned the pages in the gray pre-dawn light, she found herself looking for gaps, for things left unsaid. Thomas had come to Silver Ridge 8 years before his death, already a grown man with skills in carpentry and enough money saved to purchase lumber and supplies. She'd never questioned where he'd come from or what he'd done before. He'd told her he'd worked various jobs across Montana and Idaho, saved carefully, and finally decided to settle down. She'd accepted that story without hesitation because she'd loved him, because he'd been good to her, because their life together had been everything she'd hoped for. Now she wondered what else he hadn't told her. The clock struck 7. Catherine put the journal away and began preparing for Silas Corbett's visit. She set out coffee and the last of Adelaide's cornbread, then changed into her better dress, the dark blue wool that Thomas had always said brought out her eyes. She wasn't sure why appearances mattered, but they did. Mary came downstairs at 7:30, yawning. "You're up early, Mrs. Brennan. We're having a visitor this morning, a Mr. Corbett. He'll be here at 8. The man from the saloon? Mary's eyes went wide. Mrs. Porter came by last night after you'd gone to bed. She said you spoke to a stranger and that the whole town's buzzing about it. People talk. It doesn't mean anything. But who is he? That's what I intend to find out." Silas Corbett arrived precisely at 8, knocking on the door with the same careful restraint he'd shown in the saloon. Catherine admitted him herself, noting that he'd cleaned up since the night before. His beard was trimmed, his clothes brushed free of trail dust, his hands scrubbed clean. He carried a leather satchel over one shoulder. "Mr. Corbett, please come in. I'm grateful for your time, Mrs. Brennan." She led him to the parlor, conscious of Mary watching from the kitchen doorway. "Mary, would you give us some privacy, please?" The girl disappeared reluctantly, though Catherine suspected she'd find a way to listen. She couldn't blame her for the curiosity. Silas sat in the chair she indicated, placing his satchel carefully on the floor beside him. He accepted the coffee she poured but didn't drink, just held the cup as if gathering his thoughts. Catherine settled across from him, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Waiting. "Mrs. Brennan, I want to start by saying that I mean you no harm. I'm not here to cause trouble or distress. I'm here because I made a promise 15 years ago, and I'm a man who keeps his word." A promise to whom? To your husband, to Thomas Brennan. The confirmation of what she'd suspected still hit like a blow. Catherine's fingers tightened in her lap. "You knew Thomas?" "I did. We were partners once, long before he came to Silver Ridge, before he met you." "What kind of partners?" Silas set down his coffee cup and met her eyes directly. "Mining partners. We worked the Bitterroot Mountains together, prospecting for silver. And we found it, Mrs. Brennan. We found a strike that would have made us both wealthy men. Catherine's breath caught. Thomas never mentioned any mine. No, ma'am. I don't expect he did. Silas leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. Thomas left that life behind when he met you. He wanted something different, something honest and simple. He wanted a home and a wife and a future that didn't involve risking his neck in dark tunnels or watching his back against claim jumpers. So he walked away from our partnership, and I let him go because I understood. But he left you with the mine? He did. We shook hands, wished each other well, and I figured that was the end of it. Thomas went east to Silver Ridge, and I went deeper into the mountains. I liked the solitude up there. Still do, but before he left, Thomas made me promise something. Silas reached into his satchel and pulled out a tarnished brass compass. He held it out to Catherine. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to find you and make sure you were taken care of. He gave me this compass as a token of that promise. Catherine took the compass with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, memory flooded back. She'd seen this compass before, seen Thomas holding it, turning it over in his hands during one of their first conversations. He'd told her it was a lucky charm from his prospecting days, but when she'd asked to see it, he'd put it away and never mentioned it again. The initials engraved on the back made her throat close. T.B. Thomas Brennan. Why now? Her voice came out hoarse. Thomas died 3 years ago. Why are you here now? Silas's expression filled with regret. Because I only learned of his passing 6 months ago, Mrs. Brennan. I spend most of my time alone in the mountains, only coming to settlements a few times a year for supplies. When I finally heard the news, I knew I had to honor my promise. It took me this long to work up the courage to face you. Courage. I was afraid you'd blame me. Afraid you'd think I'd somehow failed Thomas by not being here when he needed help. Afraid. He stopped, shook his head. Afraid of a lot of things, I suppose. But a promise is a promise, and here I am. Catherine stared at the compass in her hands, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she'd believed about her life with Thomas. He'd had a whole existence before her, adventures and partnerships and secrets he'd never shared. The realization made her feel oddly betrayed, even though he'd been gone for 3 years. How did Thomas die? Silas asked quietly. If you don't mind my asking. An accident. He was helping repair the livery stable's roof and he fell. Broke his neck. The words came automatically, rehearsed from dozens of condolence conversations. Doc Whitmore said he didn't suffer. Something flickered in Silas's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or doubt. But it was gone before Catherine could identify it. I'm sorry. Thomas was a good man. He deserved better. Yes, he did. Catherine set the compass down on the table between them, not sure she wanted to hold on to it anymore. Mr. Corbett, I appreciate you coming here to honor your promise, but I'm managing fine on my own. The boarding house provides steady income, and I have a small nest egg. You're free of your obligation. It's not just about obligation, Mrs. Brennan. Silas shifted in his chair, choosing his words carefully. There's something else you need to know. The mine, it's still there. Still viable. And someone else knows about it. Catherine felt cold spread through her chest. What do you mean? I mean there's a man who's been asking questions in settlements all along the Bitterroot Range. Asking about Thomas Brennan, about old mining claims, about anyone who might know where Thomas went or what he found. This man's name is Victor Strand, and he's not someone to take lightly. Why would he be looking for Thomas? Because somehow he's learned about our strike, and if he's asking questions about Thomas, it's only a matter of time before those questions lead him here to Silver Ridge. To you. The parlor seemed to grow smaller, the walls pressing in. Catherine stood abruptly, needing to move, to pace, to do something with the nervous energy flooding her system. I don't understand any of this. Thomas is dead. What would this man want with me? Information. The location of the mine. Maybe leverage. Silas stood as well, his hands open and empty, his posture non-threatening. Mrs. Brennan, I know this is a lot to take in all at once, but I'm here because Thomas asked me to look after you, and right now, looking after you means making sure Victor Strand doesn't cause you harm. And how exactly do you plan to do that? By staying. By keeping watch. By being here if and when Strand arrives. Silas met her eyes steadily. I know I'm a stranger to you, and I know you've got no reason to trust me beyond a compass and a story. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to keep my promise to Thomas. Let me stay in Silver Ridge, at least for a while. Let me make sure you're safe. Catherine wanted to refuse, wanted to send him away and pretend this conversation had never happened. But the compass sat on the table, undeniable proof that Thomas had kept secrets from her. And if Thomas had kept one secret, what else had he hidden? You can take the room at the end of the hall, she heard herself say. Standard rate is 50 cents a day, meals included. You'll conduct yourself respectably, and if you cause any trouble, Sheriff Hadley will escort you out of town. Are we understood? Relief washed over Silas's face. Yes, ma'am. Perfectly understood. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Corbett. I still don't know whether to trust you or fear you. That's fair, Silas said quietly. I suppose time will tell which one's warranted. After he'd gone upstairs to settle into his room, Catherine sank back into her chair and picked up the compass again. The metal was warming in her hand now, losing its chill. She traced the engraved initials with her thumb, feeling the grooves worn smooth by years of handling. Who are you really, Thomas? And what have you brought to my door? Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Silver Ridge in silence. 2 days passed in an uneasy rhythm. Catherine moved through her routines, cooking, cleaning, managing the boarding house, while her mind churned with questions. She read Thomas's letters over and over, searching for meaning between the lines. Silas kept mostly to himself, occupying his room or sitting quietly in the parlor with a book from Thomas's shelf, always present but never intrusive. The town's reaction to his presence evolved from scandal to grudging acceptance. Adelaide Porter stopped by daily, ostensibly to check on Catherine, but really to observe Silas with the keen eye of a woman who'd spent 70 years learning to judge character. After the third visit, she pronounced him strange but not dangerous, which Catherine supposed was as much approval as Adelaide was likely to give. On the third morning, Sheriff Hadley returned with a worn wanted poster in his hand. His expression was grim as he laid it on Catherine's kitchen table, smoothing the creases with work-roughened fingers. Found this in my old files. Came through about 4 years ago, but I'd forgotten about it until I started digging. Catherine looked down at the crude illustration of a man's face. Hard features, cold eyes, a scar running from temple to jaw. The text beneath read, Victor Strand, wanted for murder and claim jumping, territory of Wyoming, armed and dangerous. Reward, $500. This is the man Silas mentioned, Catherine said quietly. Seems so. I sent telegrams to sheriffs in the surrounding territories asking about Strand. Got responses from 3 of them. This man's left a trail of bodies across Montana and Wyoming. Every one of them was a prospector or miner with a profitable claim. Strand would show up, the miner would die under suspicious circumstances, and Strand would disappear with all the claim documents. Silas, who'd been standing in the doorway, came forward to study the poster. How many dead? 7 that we know of. Could be more. Hadley looked at Catherine. If this man's looking for information about Thomas's mine, and if he thinks you might have it, she's in danger, Silas finished. That's what I've been trying to tell you. I'm starting to believe you might be right. Hadley sat down heavily. I also talked to Doc Whitmore again, asked him to describe Thomas's injuries in detail. He said Thomas had bruises on his upper arms, defensive wounds on his hands, and the break in his neck was... He hesitated, glancing at Catherine. It was consistent with a fall, but also with being pushed forcefully. The words hit Catherine like stones, each one adding weight to the terrible possibility. Why didn't he say this before? He did mention it to me at the time. But you were grieving, Catherine, and we had no reason to suspect murder. The stranger, Jack Porter, had witnesses placing him on the ground when Thomas fell. Sam and Billy both said Porter was holding the ladder steady. There was no obvious suspect, no clear motive. So we let it go. Unless Porter arranged it somehow, Silas said. Weakened aboard or startled Thomas at a critical moment. There are ways to make murder look like an accident. That's speculation without proof. Then let's find proof. Silas turned to Catherine. Did Thomas keep records? Account books, correspondence, anything that might mention the mine or anyone connected to it? I've gone through everything in his study. The letters to you were the only things he kept hidden. What about the boarding house records? Guest registries? Catherine's breath caught. The registry. We keep a book with every guest's name and the dates they stayed. If Jack Porter stayed here before Thomas died... She was already moving, heading to the small office off the kitchen where she kept the business ledgers. The guest registry was a thick book, its pages filled with names and dates going back to the boarding house's opening. She flipped backward through time, searching for the entries from 3 years ago. Hadley and Silas crowded around her as she found the relevant dates. Her finger traced down the page, stopping at an entry that made her heart lurch. Jack Porter stayed 2 nights, April 7th and 8th. The day Thomas died was April 9th. He was here, Catherine whispered. He stayed in this house. What room? Silas asked. Catherine checked the notation. Room 4. The one next to Thomas's study. The 3 of them exchanged glances, and without discussing it, they moved as one toward the stairs. Room 4 was currently unoccupied. Catherine unlocked the door with shaking hands, and they entered the small, neat space. It looked like every other room in the boarding house. Bed, washstand, small chest of drawers, a chair by the window. Catherine kept it clean and ready for guests. Nothing suggested it held any secrets. But Silas moved through the space with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years reading signs in wilderness. He checked behind the furniture, examined the floorboards, ran his hands along the walls. Hadley watched with professional interest while Catherine stood in the doorway, hardly daring to breathe. Here, Silas said finally, kneeling by the window. He'd found a loose board in the floor, one that lifted easily once you knew where to press. Beneath it was a hollow space, and in that space was a folded piece of paper. Silas pulled it out carefully and brought it to the window light. As he unfolded it, Catherine saw it was a map, hand-drawn, showing mountains and valleys and streams, with a large X marked in the center of a particular area. This is the Bitterroot Range, Silas said, his voice tight. And that X marks the location of our silver strike. How did Porter get this? Hadley asked. Thomas must have drawn it at some point, maybe planning to file the claim officially. Or maybe... Silas stopped, thinking. Maybe someone forced him to draw it. Maybe that's why Porter was here. Not to help with repairs, but to get information from Thomas. And when he had what he needed, he killed Thomas and left the map here for safekeeping. Catherine finished, her voice hollow. Meaning he planned to come back. Or send someone else to retrieve it. Hadley took the map, studying it closely. 3 years is a long time. If Victor Strand is involved, he might not know about this map. Porter could have died, or been arrested, or simply moved on without telling Strand about this hiding place. Which means the map is still here, and Strand is still looking. Silas met Catherine's eyes. And eventually, his search will bring him to Silver Ridge. A heavy silence fell over the room. Catherine looked at the map, at the X marking a place she'd never been. representing wealth and opportunity that had cost Thomas his life. She thought about the stranger who'd stayed under her roof, who'd eaten at her table, who'd smiled and been polite while planning her husband's murder. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. "Hard to say," Hadley replied. "But Strand was spotted 50 miles from here 2 weeks ago. He's methodical from what I've learned. He questions people, follows leads, eliminates dead ends. Eventually he'll come here," Catherine finished. She walked to the window and looked out over Silver Ridge. It was a small town, peaceful and relatively safe. She'd built a life here, found a kind of contentment even in her grief. Now a shadow was moving toward them, a man who killed for profit and left nothing but sorrow in his wake. But something was happening inside her, something she hadn't felt in 3 years. The numbness that had wrapped around her heart since Thomas's death was cracking, and beneath it she found not just fear, but anger. Anger at Thomas's murder, at the years she'd spent believing it was an accident, at the man who'd taken her husband for simple greed. She turned back to Silas and Hadley. "What do we do?" Hadley folded the map carefully. "We prepare. I'll organize a watch. Get some of the men in town ready in case Strand shows up with hired guns. We'll make sure everyone knows to report strangers immediately." "And I'll teach you to protect yourself," Silas added, looking at Catherine. "If Strand comes, you need to be ready." "Teach me to shoot, you mean?" "Among other things, Thomas would want you able to defend yourself." Catherine thought about that. About Thomas. About the letters he'd written, about the promise he'd extracted from Silas. Look after Catherine. Make sure she's safe. He'd known danger was coming and had tried to prepare for it, even if that preparation had failed to save his own life. "All right," she said. "Teach me." That afternoon, while Mary was occupied with her lessons at Adelaide's house, Silas took Catherine to a clearing outside of town. He brought 2 rifles, his own custom-made long gun and a smaller carbine better suited to Catherine's build. The snow was deep, and their breath clouded in the cold air as Silas showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight along the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pulling it. His instructions were patient and clear, his hands guiding hers into the correct position without presumption. "You have steady hands," he observed after her first few shots. "That's good. Most people shake their first time." "I'm too angry to shake," Catherine said, surprising herself with the honesty. Silas smiled slightly. "Anger can focus you, if you don't let it control you. Use it, let it make you strong." They practiced until Catherine's shoulder ached from the rifle's kick and her ears rang from the shots. By the end, she was hitting the target more often than not. Not perfect, but competent enough to defend herself if needed. As they walked back to town in the fading light, Silas said quietly, "You're different than I expected." "How so?" "Thomas wrote about you like you were fragile, something to be protected. But you're not fragile at all, are you?" Catherine considered that. "I was, after he died. I let grief make me small and scared. But maybe I'm tired of being that person." "Good," Silas said, "because what's coming will require strength, and I think you have more of it than you know." That night, Catherine lay in bed with the carbine within reach. Silas's suggestion, one she'd accepted without argument. She thought about the wanted poster, about Victor Strand with his scar and cold eyes. She thought about Jack Porter, who'd smiled at her over breakfast 3 years ago while planning murder. She thought about Thomas and the secrets he'd kept and the promise that had brought Silas Corbett to her door. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, not the grieving widow, not the fragile creature who needed protection, but someone harder and clearer and ready to face whatever came through her door. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of more snow. Somewhere out in that darkness, Victor Strand was moving closer, but Catherine Brennan was done running from shadows. When he came, she would be ready. The next few days brought an unexpected rhythm to Catherine's life. Mornings began with target practice, Silas rising early to accompany her to the clearing, where she practiced until her shots grouped tighter and her movements grew more confident. Afternoons were spent managing the boarding house, though she found herself more aware now, watching strangers with careful attention, noting comings and goings. Evenings were quieter. After Mary went to bed, Catherine and Silas would sit in the parlor, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sharing the silence. He told her about his years in the mountains, about the solitude he'd sought and the peace he'd found in wild places. She told him about Thomas, about their life together, about the dreams they'd built and the future they'd planned. It was during one of these evenings that Silas pulled out a piece of wood and a small knife and began to carve. Catherine watched his hands move with practiced precision, shaving away thin curls that fell like snow onto the hearth. "What are you making?" she asked. "A horse." "For Mary. Thought she might like it." Catherine felt something warm kindle in her chest. "That's kind of you." "She's a good girl. Reminds me of my sister at that age. All serious eyes and quiet strength." He glanced up. "You've done well with her, taking her in when you had no obligation to." "I had every obligation. She had no one else, and I—" Catherine stopped, surprised by what she'd been about to say. "You had room in your heart," Silas finished gently, "even when you thought it was full of grief." They were quiet for a while, the only sound the whisper of the knife through wood and the crackle of the fire. Then Silas spoke again, his voice careful. "May I ask you something personal, Mrs. Brennan?" "Catherine, I think we've gone past formality." "Catherine, then, why did you never remarry? 3 years is a respectable mourning period. You're still young, capable. You could have had offers." Catherine thought about Adelaide saying nearly the same thing, about the assumption that widows should move on, should find new husbands, should continue the prescribed pattern of women's lives. "I never wanted to. Thomas he was everything to me. The thought of replacing him felt like betrayal. And now I don't know what I feel." She looked at the fire, watching the flames dance. "I'm angry at him for keeping secrets. I'm grieving him all over again, learning he died for something I never knew existed. But I also understand him better. He wanted to give me a simple life, an honest one. He thought he could leave his past behind and it would never catch up." "We all make that mistake," Silas said quietly, "thinking we can outrun what we've been." "Is that what you're doing, running?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I loved someone once, a long time ago before I knew Thomas. She was a merchant's daughter in Helena, and I was a young prospector with more dreams than sense. I thought if I struck it rich, she'd wait for me. But she married someone else, someone stable, someone who could give her a home and security right then, not someday. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made the right choice. I wasn't ready to be what she needed. So I went to the mountains and I stayed there, and after a while I realized I preferred it that way. The solitude, the simplicity, no one to disappoint except myself." "Is that why you never filed the mine claim?" "Even after Thomas left?" "Partly. But also because once Thomas was gone, the mine felt like a memory of friendship rather than wealth. I worked it enough to keep myself supplied, but I never wanted to develop it fully. That felt like it would cheapen what Thomas and I had built together." Catherine studied his face in the firelight. The lines carved by weather and time, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet strength she'd come to rely on. "You're a good man, Silas Corbett." "I'm a man who keeps his promises. That's all. That's more than most people manage." The horse took shape over several evenings. Catherine watched it emerge from the wood, head lowered as if grazing, tail flowing, every line suggesting grace and strength. When it was finished, Silas smoothed it with fine sand until it gleamed, then presented it to Mary at breakfast. The girl's face lit with such pure joy that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Mary turned the horse over in her hands, marveling at the detail, the smoothness, the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful, Mr. Corbett." "Thank you." "You're welcome, young miss. Treat it well." Mary carried the horse everywhere after that, and Catherine noticed something shift in the girl's demeanor around Silas. She began to seek him out, asking questions about the mountains, about animals, about his life. He answered patiently, treating her queries with the same respect he'd given adults. One afternoon, Catherine found them in the parlor together, Silas teaching Mary to whittle with careful supervision. He'd given her a piece of soft pine and a small knife, showing her how to carve away from herself, how to work with the grain rather than against it. "Like this?" Mary asked, shaving off a thin curl. "Exactly like that. You're a natural." Catherine watched them from the doorway, something shifting in her understanding. This was what family could look like. Not just blood relation or legal bonds, but people caring for each other, teaching and learning, building trust through small daily acts of kindness. That night, after Mary had gone to bed clutching her wooden horse, Catherine and Silas sat by the fire again. She found herself studying him, really looking at him for the first time without the filter of suspicion or grief. "What made you decide to teach her carving?" she asked. "She reminds me of myself at that age. Smart, watchful, a little lonely. Working with wood gave me something to focus on when things felt uncertain. Thought it might do the same for her." "You're good with her." "She's easy to be good with." Silas set down his coffee cup. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her straighten. "What is it?" "I got word today from a trapper passing through. Victor Strand was seen in Millerville. That's only 20 miles from here." The warmth of the moment evaporated. Catherine felt the familiar clench of fear in her stomach. "How long until he arrives?" "Could be days. Could be a week. But he's coming." Silas met her eyes. "Are you ready?" Catherine thought about the rifle upstairs, about the shooting practice, about the anger that had been slowly replacing her fear. She thought about Thomas and Mary and this man who'd come into her life carrying promises and secrets. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Soft, protected, unprepared for the harsh realities of frontier life. She was no longer that woman. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm ready." "Good, because tomorrow, Sheriff Hadley and I think we should set a trap. Use what Strand wants to draw him out on our terms, not his. The map. The map. If we let word spread that you've discovered your late husband's mining claim and you're planning to file it officially, Strand will have to act. He can't risk losing the location. You want to use me as bait. I want to control the situation before it controls us." Silas leaned forward. "But I won't do it without your agreement. It's your life, your risk. If you'd rather we try another way." "No," Catherine interrupted. "You're right. Better to face him when we're prepared than to wait for him to come when we're not. We do this. Then we'd better start planning, because once we set this in motion, there's no going back." Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness, Victor Strand moved closer to Silver Ridge. Victor Strand arrived in Silver Ridge at midday, and contrary to everything Catherine had imagined, he arrived alone and in full daylight. No hired guns, no midnight approach, no attempt at stealth. He simply rode into town on a fine bay horse, dressed in a well-tailored coat and clean hat, looking more like a successful merchant than a wanted murderer. Catherine was in the boarding-house kitchen when Mary burst in, breathless. "Mrs. Brennan, there's a stranger at the Copper Bell. Mr. Corbett says you should come right away." Catherine's heart lurched, but she forced herself to move calmly, wiping her hands on her apron and reaching for her coat. The carbine was upstairs, but Silas had insisted she keep a small pistol in her coat pocket. She touched it now, reassuring herself of its presence. The copper bell was crowded when she arrived, and Strand stood at the center of attention like a man born to command a room. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s at most, with dark hair silvering at the temples and a scar running from temple to jaw that should have made him look dangerous but somehow only added to his charisma. He was buying drinks for the house, telling stories, laughing easily with the miners and merchants. Silas stood in the corner, his eyes tracking Strand's every movement. When Catherine entered, Silas made his way to her side. "That's him," he murmured. "No doubt about it." Catherine studied the man who'd likely ordered Thomas's death. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone you'd trust, someone you'd do business with, someone who would shake your hand and smile while planning your destruction. Sheriff Hadley was there too, positioned near the door, watching. They'd agreed on a plan. Let Strand make his move. Let him reveal what he wanted, gather evidence before acting. But Catherine's hands were shaking, rage and fear warring in her chest. Strand's voice carried across the room. "I'm here on business, gentlemen, looking for information about old mining claims in these parts, particularly anything connected to a man named Thomas Brennan. I'm prepared to pay well for solid leads." The room went quiet. Every eye turned to Catherine. Strand followed their gazes, and when he saw her, his smile widened. He moved toward her with the confidence of a man who'd never met resistance he couldn't overcome. "Mrs. Brennan, I presume? Victor Strand, at your service." He removed his hat, made a small bow. "I apologize for the public approach, but I've been searching for you for quite some time. Might we speak privately?" "Anything you have to say to her, you can say in front of witnesses," Silas said, stepping slightly in front of Catherine. Strand's eyes flickered to Silas, assessing. "And you are?" "Silas Corbett, Thomas Brennan's former partner." "Ah, the mountain man. I'd heard you were in town." Strand's smile never wavered. "This is convenient, actually. Saves me the trouble of tracking you down separately." "What do you want?" Catherine asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "To make you wealthy, Mrs. Brennan. You see, I have information that your late husband discovered a significant silver deposit in the Bitterroot Mountains. Information I'm prepared to share in exchange for a partnership. 50-50 split, all legal and proper. You help me locate and file the claim. We both profit. Simple as that." "And if I refuse?" "Why would you refuse? You're running a boarding house, scraping by when you could be living in comfort. Your husband found that silver, Mrs. Brennan. Don't you think you deserve to benefit from his discovery?" Catherine felt Silas tense beside her, but she kept her eyes on Strand. "How do you know about the mine?" "I have my sources. Your husband wasn't as discreet as he thought." Strand reached into his coat, and both Silas and Hadley shifted, hands moving toward weapons, but Strand only pulled out a leather document case, opening it to reveal papers. "I have proof, if you doubt me. A letter from Thomas Brennan himself, and a map showing the location." He spread the documents on the nearest table, and Catherine moved closer despite herself. The letter was in Thomas's handwriting. She recognized it immediately. The map looked identical to the one they'd found hidden in room 4. Her breath caught. How did Strand have these? She picked up the letter with trembling hands and began to read. It was dated 5 years ago, 2 years before Thomas's death, and it was addressed to someone named Marcus Webb. "Marcus, I'm writing to propose a business arrangement. I've discovered a silver deposit of significant value in the Bitterroot Range. However, I lack the capital to develop it properly. If you can provide financial backing, I'm prepared to offer you 30% of the profits. I've enclosed a map showing the location. Let me know if you're interested in discussing terms. Thomas Brennan." Catherine's vision blurred. "I don't understand." "Your husband was looking for investors," Strand explained. "Marcus Webb was a business associate of mine. Unfortunately, Marcus died in a mining accident before he could pursue Thomas's offer. His papers came to me, and I decided to follow up on the opportunity." "That's a lie," Silas said flatly. "Thomas never would have done this. He walked away from that mine specifically because he didn't want to develop it." "People change their minds, Mr. Corbett, especially when they have families to support, boarding houses to maintain, futures to secure." Strand's eyes moved to Catherine. "Perhaps your husband didn't tell you because he didn't want to get your hopes up. Perhaps he was waiting until the deal was solid before sharing the news. But the documents don't lie. He was planning to develop that mine." Catherine felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Could Thomas have done this? Could he have kept yet another secret, made plans she knew nothing about? The letter was in his handwriting, the map in his drawing style. She wanted to believe it was a forgery, but doubt was creeping in. "There's more," Strand continued, his voice gentle now, sympathetic. "I've been investigating your husband's death, Mrs. Brennan. I believe it may not have been an accident." The room went absolutely silent. "What are you suggesting?" Hadley asked, his voice hard. "I'm suggesting that someone else knew about the mine, someone who wanted Thomas out of the way so they could claim it for themselves. Someone who was conveniently nearby when Thomas died." Strand's eyes fixed on Silas. "Someone like his former partner, perhaps." Catherine's head snapped towards Silas, whose face had gone pale. "That's insane. I was in the mountains when Thomas died. I didn't even know he'd passed until months later." "So you say. But can you prove it? Can anyone verify your whereabouts during April of 3 years ago?" "You're trying to frame me," Silas said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I'm trying to uncover the truth. Mrs. Brennan deserves to know what really happened to her husband." Strand pulled out another document. A sworn statement from someone named John Mitchell, claiming he'd seen a man matching Silas's description in Silver Ridge the week of Thomas's death. "That's a lie!" Silas lunged forward, but Hadley caught his arm. "Easy, Corbett. Let him talk." Catherine's mind was reeling. She looked at Silas. This man she'd come to trust, who'd taught her to shoot, who'd carved horses for Mary, who'd sat with her by the fire sharing his past. Could it all have been manipulation? Could he have killed Thomas for the mine and come here pretending to honor a promise while actually ensuring she didn't suspect him? No, she knew him. She knew the honesty in his eyes, the integrity in his actions. But the doubt was there now, poisonous and spreading. "Mrs. Brennan," Strand said softly, "I understand this is difficult. But consider the facts. Corbett appears after 3 years, claiming Thomas asked him to protect you. Convenient. He stays in your home, gains your trust, learns everything you know about Thomas's affairs, and now, just as I arrive to offer you legitimate partnership, he tries to turn you against me. Ask yourself, who benefits from keeping you isolated and afraid?" "Stop," Catherine whispered. Then louder, "Stop." Everyone turned to look at her. She felt torn in pieces, her trust in Silas warring with the evidence before her, her anger at Thomas for his secrets mixing with her grief at losing him again. She wanted to scream, to weep, to demand the truth from someone who would actually give it to her. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to verify these documents, to understand what's real and what's not." "Of course," Strand said smoothly. "Take all the time you need. I'm staying at the hotel when you're ready to discuss the partnership and to get answers about what really happened to your husband. You know where to find me." He gathered his documents, tipped his hat to Catherine, and left the saloon. The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with speculation. Hadley moved to intercept Silas, who looked like he might follow Strand. "Not now, Corbett. Let him go." "He's lying," Silas said desperately, turning to Catherine. "Everything he said is calculated to drive a wedge between us. Can't you see that?" "I don't know what I see anymore," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I thought I knew Thomas. I thought I knew you. But maybe I don't know anything at all." She walked out of the saloon, leaving both men behind. The winter air hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it, needed it to clear her head. She walked without direction, ending up at the small cemetery on the edge of town where Thomas lay buried. His grave was simple, just a wooden cross and a small stone marker. She'd visited it faithfully every week for 3 years, talking to him, telling him about her days, maintaining the connection she couldn't bear to lose. Now she stood before it and felt only confusion and anger. "Who were you?" she asked the frozen ground. "What else did you hide from me?" The wind offered no answers. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She turned to find Adelaide approaching, bundled against the cold. "Heard what happened at the saloon," Adelaide said. "Thought you might need company." "I need answers. That's what I need." "Maybe. Or maybe what you need is to trust your instincts." Adelaide stood beside her, looking down at Thomas's grave. "That Strand fellow is smooth. Too smooth. Men like that make their living by seeming trustworthy. But I've known liars in my time, Catherine. I've seen how they work, and everything about Victor Strand sets my teeth on edge. But the documents can be forged, stolen, manipulated. You think a man who's killed 7 people wouldn't think to come prepared with convincing lies?" Catherine closed her eyes. "What about Silas? How do I know he's telling the truth?" "You don't, not for certain. But I've been watching him these past weeks. The way he looks at you, the way he treats Mary, the way he carries himself. That's not a man hiding guilt, Catherine. That's a man trying to keep a promise to a friend. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Trust what you've seen with your own eyes, not what a stranger tells you in a saloon while buying drinks and smiling." Catherine thought about the past weeks. Silas teaching her to shoot. Silas sitting quietly while she grieved. Silas carving a horse for a lonely little girl. She thought about the steady honesty in his eyes, the way he never pushed her, never demanded trust, but simply offered it. And she thought about Strand's smooth words, his perfect documents, his convenient explanations that painted Silas as the villain while positioning himself as the hero. It was too neat, too calculated. "I need to see those documents again," Catherine said suddenly. "Really examine them. Thomas had habits in his writing, little quirks. If it's a forgery, I'll know." "That's my girl," Adelaide said with satisfaction. "Fight for the truth, not the easy answer." They walked back to town together, and Catherine felt something solidify inside her. Determination replacing confusion, clarity cutting through doubt. Victor Strand had made a mistake. He'd assumed she was weak, confused, ready to be manipulated. He didn't know about the woman she'd become, the strength she'd discovered in facing her fear, and he was about to find out just how wrong he'd been. Catherine spent that night in Thomas's study, surrounded by his letters, his journals, and every scrap of his handwriting she could find. She laid Strand's documents beside them, comparing the formations of letters, the pressure of the pen, the rhythm of the words. Silas sat across from her, silent and watchful, while Hadley paced the small room. "Here," Catherine said finally, pointing to a particular flourish in Thomas's signature. Thomas always made his capital B, with a slight backward hook at the top. It was distinctive. He'd learned it from his father, he told me once. Every signature he ever made had that hook. She pointed to Strand's document. "This doesn't, it's close, but it's not right. And here, see how Thomas always crossed his T's with a slight upward sweep. This one is straight across. Someone copied his handwriting, but they didn't know the small details." Hadley leaned in, squinting at the papers. "Could be you're right. Could be you want to see a forgery so badly that you're inventing one." "It's not invented," Silas said quietly. "I've seen enough of Thomas's writing to know Catherine's right. That letter is a fake, and a good one, but still a fake." "But how did Strand get access to Thomas's handwriting to copy it?" Catherine asked. Unless Jack Porter took samples when he stayed here, Silas finished. Papers from Thomas's study, perhaps, or the guest registry, anything with Thomas's signature or writing on it. Catherine felt sick. The thought of that man rifling through Thomas's belongings, stealing pieces of him to use in murder and fraud, made her want to scream. But she pushed the emotion down, focused on what needed to be done. "We need more than a handwriting analysis to prove Strand is lying," Hadley said. "We need solid evidence, or he'll just claim we're the ones fabricating things." "Then we get him to confess," Catherine said. "We make him think he's won, that I'm ready to partner with him. We draw him out, get him talking, and we record what he says." "That's dangerous," Silas objected. "If he realizes what you're doing, then you'll be there. You and Ben and however many deputies we need. But we have to do something. We can't just wait for him to make his move." Hadley rubbed his jaw. "There's a man in town, a clerk at the land office, who has one of those Edison recording machines. Uses it for taking depositions sometimes. If we could set up a meeting with Strand in a place where we could hide the machine—" "Here," Catherine interrupted. "Let him come here, to the boarding house. Tell him I've decided to accept his partnership offer, but I want to discuss terms privately. He'll see it as a victory, proof that he's successfully driven a wedge between Silas and me." "I don't like it," Silas said flatly. "You don't have to like it. You just have to help me do it safely." Catherine met his eyes. "Silas, I trust you. I want you to know that. Strand tried to make me doubt you, and for a moment I did. I'm sorry for that. But I know who you are, and I know you would never hurt Thomas or me." Something shifted in Silas's expression. Relief, gratitude, something deeper she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he said softly. The next morning, Catherine sent word to Strand that she was ready to discuss his proposal. He arrived at the boarding house that afternoon, impeccably dressed, carrying a leather case full of official-looking documents. He didn't know that behind the wall of Catherine's parlor, in a small space that had once been a storage closet, Sheriff Hadley crouched with the recording machine, its wax cylinder slowly turning, capturing every word. He didn't know that Silas waited upstairs with a loaded rifle, positioned where he could see into the parlor through a crack in the floorboards. He didn't know that Mary had been sent to Adelaide's house for safety, or that 3 of Hadley's most trusted men waited in the boarding house's back rooms. He thought he'd won. Catherine served him coffee with steady hands, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Strand. Please, call me Victor. After all, we're about to be partners." He settled into his chair with easy confidence. "I'm glad you've come to see reason, Mrs. Brennan. Your husband would want you to benefit from his discovery." "About that," Catherine said carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Thomas's death. You believe someone killed him for the mine?" "I do, and I believe I know who." "Silas Corbett." "Precisely." Strand leaned forward. "Consider the timeline, Catherine. May I call you Catherine? Corbett was Thomas's partner. They discovered the mine together. Thomas left, planning to develop it himself or with other investors. That must have infuriated Corbett. So he waited, bided his time, and then came here to eliminate Thomas and claim the mine as his own. But Silas says he was in the mountains when Thomas died. Of course he does. What else would he say? But I have a witness, John Mitchell, who places Corbett in Silver Ridge that week. I can produce him if needed." Catherine took a sip of her coffee, buying time. "Let's say you're right. Let's say Silas killed Thomas. Why would he wait 3 years to come back? Why not claim the mine immediately?" "Because the claim was never filed. Without Thomas alive to file it, and without the map showing its exact location, Corbett couldn't prove ownership. He needed you, needed to gain your trust, search your home, find the documents. It's brilliant, really, in a twisted way. Come in as the loyal friend, the protector, all while searching for the evidence he needs to steal what should have been his and Thomas's together." The words were smooth, logical, convincing. Catherine could see how easy it would be to believe them if you didn't know Silas, didn't trust him. Strand was good at this, at weaving lies that sounded like truth. "You seem to have thought this through carefully," she said. "I have a lot of experience with men like Corbett. Men who believe they deserve what others have worked for, who justify murder as evening the scales. I've seen it in the mining territories. It's all too common. And you? What's your interest in all this?" "Justice, primarily. And yes, profit. I won't lie and pretend I'm doing this purely from the goodness of my heart. The mine is valuable, and I deserve compensation for my investigation, for the risk I'm taking in exposing Corbett. But I'm offering you a fair partnership, Catherine. 50-50. More than fair, considering I'm the one bringing the evidence, the resources to develop the claim properly. What about the letter, the one supposedly from Thomas to Marcus Webb? What about it? I'd like to see it again. Study it more carefully." Strand's expression flickered. Just for a moment, something like wariness, but he recovered smoothly. "Of course. Though I should warn you, I've had it examined by handwriting experts. It's genuine." He pulled it from his case and handed it over. Catherine made a show of examining it, turning it to catch the light, running her fingers over the paper. "Thomas's handwriting," she murmured. "But something's not quite right." "What do you mean?" "The signature. Thomas had a distinctive way of forming his capital B. A little hook at the top. This doesn't have it." Strand's smile tightened. "You're mistaken. It's been 3 years. Perhaps you're misremembering." "No, I don't think so." Catherine set the letter down. "I think this is a forgery, Victor. I think you created it to give yourself legitimacy, to make your story believable. Just like you created the witness statement placing Silas in town when Thomas died." The air in the room changed. Strand's affable mask slipped, and beneath it, Catherine saw something cold and calculating. "That's a serious accusation." "Is it? Or is it the truth?" Catherine stood, putting distance between them. "You're very good, I'll give you that. You almost had me convinced, but you made mistakes. Small ones, but enough." Strand stood as well, his hand moving toward his coat. Catherine's hand found the pistol in her pocket. "I wouldn't," she said quietly. "The house is full of armed men. Sheriff Hadley is behind that wall recording every word you've said. And Silas Corbett is upstairs with a rifle aimed at your chest. You're not leaving here except in chains." For a long moment, Strand stood frozen. Then he laughed, a bitter, angry sound. "You think you're clever. You think this little trap will hold up in any court? I have resources, Catherine, lawyers, friends in high places. I'll walk away from this, and then I'll come back for you when you least expect it. Maybe, but at least everyone will know the truth." Catherine's voice was steady now, all fear burned away by anger and determination. "You killed my husband, or you had him killed. Either way, his blood is on your hands. Prove it." "I don't have to prove it. You're going to tell me what happened. You're going to explain exactly how you and Jack Porter planned Thomas's murder, how you forged those documents, how you've been hunting for that mine for 3 years. You're going to confess. And why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll make sure that map you want so badly disappears forever. I'll destroy it, burn it to ashes, and you'll never find that silver. But if you tell me the truth, all of it, I'll make sure the authorities know where it is. You'll hang for murder, but at least you'll die knowing you almost succeeded." Strand's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy that map. It's worth a fortune." "Try me," Catherine said. "I've spent 3 years grieving a man whose murder I thought was an accident. I've lived with that lie, built my life around it. Do you really think I care about money more than the truth?" The silence stretched, between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Strand's shoulders sagged slightly, not in defeat, but in a kind of resigned calculation, as if he were weighing his options and finding them all poor. "You want the truth?" he said finally. "Fine, I'll give you the truth. But not because you've trapped me. Because I want you to understand that your husband wasn't the saint you think he was." Behind the wall, the wax cylinder kept turning, recording everything. Thomas Brennan contacted Marcus Webb 5 years ago, just as the letter says. But Webb was my partner, not just an associate. We worked claim jumping together. He'd find prospects, I'd eliminate the competition. It was profitable until Thomas's letter gave us our biggest opportunity yet. Catherine felt sick but kept her face impassive. Webb went to Silver Ridge to investigate, to verify the claim, but Thomas got suspicious, refused to give him the exact location. So Webb sent for me. I arranged for Jack Porter, one of my best men, to infiltrate, to gain Thomas's trust, to find the map. Porter stayed at your boarding house, searched Thomas's study, found papers with his handwriting to forge documents. But he couldn't find the map. So you had him kill Thomas? Not immediately. First we tried persuasion. Porter arranged that roofing job, got Thomas alone on that roof. He offered money, partnership, anything. Thomas refused, said he'd decided not to develop the mine at all, that he was content with his simple life. He actually laughed at us, laughed at the fortune we were offering him. Strand's voice had gone hard, angry at the memory. So yes, Porter pushed him, made it look like an accident. We thought the map would be in his belongings, easy to find once he was gone. But it wasn't. We searched everywhere. The boarding house, his study, everywhere. Finally realized Porter must have hidden it during his stay and forgotten where. By then he'd moved on, died in a knife fight in Oregon before I could question him properly. 3 years you've been searching. 3 years. Following every lead, questioning everyone who knew Thomas, trying to piece together where that damned map might be. Until I finally realized, you must have it, or Corbett does. So I came here with my documents and my story, ready to charm or threaten or whatever it took to get what I wanted. And now, Strand smiled without humor. Now I'm finished. But so are you, Catherine. You think recording my confession means anything? I'll claim it was coerced, that you threatened me, that I said what you wanted to hear under duress. No court will convict me on that alone. Maybe not, Catherine agreed, but they'll investigate. They'll find other victims, other evidence. You're not as clever as you think you are, Victor. You leave trails. The door burst open, Hadley and his deputies, guns drawn. Behind them came Silas, his rifle trained steady on Strand. The killer looked around at the armed men. At Catherine standing tall and unafraid, and something like respect crossed his face. You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Brennan. I had good teachers, Catherine said quietly. They took Strand away in chains. Catherine stood in her parlor, watching through the window as they led him to the jail, and felt something loosen in her chest. Grief held so long it had become part of her structure, now finally beginning to release. Silas stood beside her, silent. After a while, he said, "You were brave in there, braver than I expected." I was terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. He paused. Thomas would be proud of you. Thomas should have told me the truth from the beginning. All of it. Catherine turned from the window. But I understand why he didn't. He wanted to protect me from exactly this, from the ugliness and violence that comes with greed. He thought he could leave it all behind and it would never touch us. We all want to believe we can outrun our past. But we can't. It catches up eventually. Catherine looked at Silas. What happens now, with the mine? That's up to you. You're Thomas's widow. Legally, any claim he had passes to you. I don't want it. I don't want anything that cost Thomas his life. She made her decision quickly, definitively. File the claim, Silas. Put it in both our names, yours and mine. Sell it to a legitimate mining company. Whatever money comes from it, we split 3 ways, you, me, and we establish a fund in Thomas's name. For widows and orphans, for people in this town who need help. Let something good come from all this sorrow. Silas studied her face for a long moment. You're sure? I'm sure. Thomas died because of greed. His own ambitions, Strand's avarice, the simple human hunger for wealth. I won't let that poison continue. We end it here, now, by choosing something different. Then that's what we'll do. Silas extended his hand. Partners? Catherine took it. Partners. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow she would testify against Strand. Tomorrow she would begin the legal process of claiming the mine and transforming its curse into blessing. Tomorrow she would start building the future Thomas had wanted for her, not the one he'd planned, but something better, something earned through courage and choice. But tonight she simply stood in the warmth of her home, holding the hand of a man who'd kept his promise and let herself finally, truly, begin to heal. The attack came at dawn, when the guards were changing shifts and attention was briefly divided. Catherine woke to the sound of breaking glass downstairs, followed by shouts and gunfire. She rolled out of bed, grabbed the carbine, and ran to Mary's room. Under the bed now. She pushed the frightened girl into the hiding space, then positioned herself by the door. More gunfire, footsteps pounding up the stairs. Catherine's heart hammered, but her hands were steady as she raised the rifle to her shoulder, exactly as Silas had taught her. Breathe. Aim. Squeeze. Don't pull. A man burst through the doorway, someone she didn't recognize, gun drawn. She fired without hesitation. The shot hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his weapon and fell, clutching the wound. Stay down, Catherine commanded, training the rifle on him. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hard and cold and utterly unlike the soft-spoken widow she'd been months ago. More chaos below. She heard Silas shouting, heard Hadley's voice, heard the deputies engaging the intruders. Then silence, sudden and absolute. Catherine? Silas's voice from downstairs. Are you all right? I'm fine. One man up here, wounded. Footsteps on the stairs, then Silas appeared in the doorway, blood on his shirt where his bandage had torn open, his rifle in hand. Relief flooded his face when he saw her standing there, unharmed. You shot him. I did. Catherine's hands were starting to shake now, adrenaline fading. Mary's under the bed. Silas moved past her to secure the wounded intruder while Catherine knelt by the bed. It's safe now, sweetheart. You can come out? Mary emerged, pale and silent. Catherine pulled her close, and they stayed that way until the shaking stopped. Downstairs, the scene was controlled chaos. 3 intruders lay dead or wounded, Strand's men, all of them, according to papers Hadley found. They'd been staying at a rooming house on the edge of town, planning their attack for days. One got away, Hadley reported grimly. Fled when he saw the others go down. We'll find him, but he's armed and dangerous. The wounded man Catherine had shot was named Brennan, and after Doc Whitmore patched him up, he decided cooperation was preferable to hanging. He told them everything, how Strand had arranged for them to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to his interests, how there were 5 of them total, how they'd been promised a share of the mine's profits if they succeeded. The 5th man, Hadley pressed. Where would he go? Don't know. We scattered if things went wrong. Planned to regroup at the old mill outside town. Hadley dispatched deputies immediately, but Catherine felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. The old mill was where Thomas had died. It seemed fitting, in a terrible way, that this would end where it began. I'm going with you, she told Hadley. Catherine, no. You've been through enough. Thomas died at that mill. If there's a chance to finally end this, I need to be there. She looked at Silas, who nodded slowly. If she's going, I'm going, he said. We see this through together. They rode out in the grey dawn light, a group of 8, Catherine, Silas, Hadley, and 5 deputies. The mill sat on the edge of Silver Ridge's territory, abandoned since a fire had gutted it 5 years ago. Catherine had never been there before, had never wanted to see the place where Thomas had his accident. Now, approaching it through the snow, she felt ghosts pressing close. The mill was a skeleton of burned timber and crumbling stone. Hadley deployed his men around the perimeter while Catherine, Silas, and the sheriff approached from the front. Fresh tracks in the snow confirmed someone had come here recently. "Come out," Hadley called. "You're surrounded. There's no escape." Silence. Then a voice from inside. "I want a safe passage. Promise me I walk out of here free and I'll tell you everything Strand planned." "No deals," Hadley replied. "Come out with your hands up or we come in shooting." A shot rang out, splintering wood near Hadley's head. The deputies returned fire, and suddenly the air was full of gunshots and shouting. Catherine pressed against the mill's stone foundation, Silas beside her, both of them trapped between the building and the deputy's position. "We need to move," Silas said urgently. "Get to better cover." But as they started to move, the 5th man appeared above them on what remained of the mill's 2nd floor. His gun was trained directly at Catherine. Time seemed to slow. Catherine saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Silas moving to shield her, saw the inevitability of what was about to happen. Then 2 shots rang out simultaneously, one from the man above, one from somewhere to their left. The man fell, toppling from the ruined floor to land in the snow with a sickening thud. Catherine looked down at herself, searching for wounds, finding none. Silas was bleeding from a fresh graze across his arm, but otherwise intact. "Who?" she began. Adelaide Porter emerged from behind a stand of trees, a hunting rifle in her hands and a fierce expression on her weathered face. "Nobody threatens my neighbors," she said flatly. "Not while I'm breathing." Hadley stared at her. "Adelaide, what in God's name are you doing here?" "Following you. Figured you might need extra guns, and I've been shooting since before you were born, Ben Hadley." She walked over to inspect her handiwork. "He's dead. Good." The last of Strand's men was indeed dead, and with him died the immediate threat. Hadley's deputies secured the mill, searching for any evidence, while Catherine stood in the snow, staring at the building where Thomas had been murdered 3 years ago. "I thought coming here would hurt," she said softly. "But it doesn't. It just feels over." Silas touched her shoulder gently. "Because it is over, Thomas can rest now, and so can you." They rode back to Silver Ridge in the pale morning light. Mary ran out to meet them. Adelaide swept her up with surprising strength, and the entire town seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The nightmare was finished. Strand would hang, his men were dead or captured, and Silver Ridge could return to peace. That evening, Catherine sat in her parlor with Silas, both of them bandaged and exhausted, but alive. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. They'd survived something terrible together, and in surviving had forged something that transcended simple friendship. "Thank you," Catherine said finally, "for keeping your promise, for protecting me and Mary." "Thomas knew what he was doing when he asked me," Silas replied. "He knew you'd need someone who understood both the danger and the way forward." "What happens now, after the trial, after the mine is sold?" "I don't know. I've been alone in the mountains for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." He paused. "But I'd like to try, if you'd let me." Catherine met his eyes and saw in them possibility, not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something new and genuine and earned through hardship. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like that very much." Outside, stars were emerging in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But inside the boarding house, there was only warmth and safety and the promise of better days ahead. Spring came to Silver Ridge with the force of a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The streams ran high with runoff, and birds returned to nest in the eaves of buildings. The world, it seemed, was determined to prove that winter always ended, that darkness always gave way to light. Victor Strand hanged on a cool morning in April, exactly 3 years and 1 week after Thomas Brennan's death. Catherine didn't attend the execution. She had no desire to watch a man die, even one who'd killed her husband. Justice had been served. That was enough. The mine sold to a legitimate mining company out of Helena for a sum that made Catherine dizzy when she heard the number. She'd never imagined that much money. Couldn't quite grasp what it meant. But Silas helped her understand, helped her establish the Thomas Brennan Memorial Fund with 1/3 of the proceeds, helped her invest the rest wisely, so she'd never have to worry about the boarding house failing or Mary's future being uncertain. The fund's first recipient was a widow named Martha Hayes, whose husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with 4 children and no income. The look on Martha's face when Catherine handed her the money, enough to keep her family fed and housed for a year, made every moment of fear and pain worthwhile. "Thank you," Martha had whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You don't know what this means." But Catherine did know. She knew exactly what it meant to be a widow, to face an uncertain future, to wonder how you'd survive, and if Thomas's death could prevent that suffering for others, then perhaps something good had come from the tragedy after all. Silas stayed in Silver Ridge, much to everyone's surprise. He kept his room at the boarding house, but spent his days helping around town, mending fences, repairing roofs, teaching young men the skills he'd learned in his years of self-sufficiency. Adelaide proclaimed him surprisingly useful for a hermit, which Catherine knew was high praise indeed. Slowly, carefully, something grew between Catherine and Silas. Not a whirlwind romance. Neither of them was built for such things, but a deep companionship rooted in trust and shared experience. They took walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He taught Mary to identify animal tracks and edible plants. Catherine learned to appreciate silence the way Silas did, finding peace in simply being rather than constantly doing. One evening in late May, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset, Silas said, "I've been thinking about building a place of my own, not far from town but with some land. Room for a garden, maybe a few animals. A real home." Catherine's heart beat a little faster. "That sounds nice. I was wondering—" He stopped, started again. "I was wondering if you might consider helping me design it. You know about houses, about what makes a place feel like home, and I'd value your input." She understood what he was really asking. Not marriage. Not yet, maybe not ever in the formal sense, but partnership. A future built together, step by careful step. "I'd be honored," she said softly. They built the house over the summer, working side by side in the warm Montana sunshine. Mary helped too, learning to hammer nails and measure boards. Adelaide supervised from a chair in the shade, offering advice and criticism in equal measure. Sheriff Hadley stopped by regularly, ostensibly to check on progress, but really just to be part of something good, something that spoke of life continuing despite loss. The house was simple but solid. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a large fireplace, a kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning light. Silas carved details into the door frames and window sills, small flourishes that made the structure feel alive. Catherine sewed curtains and cushions, filling the space with color and warmth. When it was finished, they stood in the main room together, surveying their work. "It's beautiful," Catherine said. "It's home," Silas replied. Then, turning to her, "Catherine, I know we've talked around this for months, but I need to say it plainly. I love you, not as a replacement for Thomas, not as an obligation or a promise kept. I love you for who you are, strong and kind and brave beyond measure. And if you'd consider sharing this home with me, sharing a future together, I'd count myself the most fortunate man alive." Catherine looked at this man who'd come into her life carrying a compass and a promise. She thought about Thomas, about the love they'd shared and the life they'd built. She thought about grief and healing, about fear and courage, about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling right and true. "And yes, I'll share this home with you, but not right away. Let me finish out the summer at the boarding house. Let Mary get used to the idea. Let us do this properly, with time and intention." "However you want to do it," Silas said, pulling her close. "I'm not going anywhere." They married in September, a simple ceremony with the whole town in attendance. Mary stood beside Catherine, holding a bouquet of late-season wildflowers. Adelaide wept openly. Sheriff Hadley gave Catherine away with gruff tenderness. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Catherine felt not the betrayal she'd feared, but rather a sense of rightness, as if this had always been where her journey was leading. That evening, as she sat in her new home watching the sun set over the mountains, Catherine pulled out her journal, a new one, unburdened by the past, and began to write. "Today I begin again," she wrote, echoing the words she'd thought months ago. But this time, they meant something different. Not beginning again as if the past had never happened, but beginning with the wisdom and strength the past had given her. Thomas would always be part of her story, but he was no longer the whole of it. She looked at Silas, who was carving something by the fire. A gift for Mary, she suspected. She looked at the home they'd built together, at the life stretching out before them. She thought about the widow's fund, helping families across the territory, about the mine's curse transformed into blessing. Some faces you never forget, she'd thought that winter night in the saloon. And it was true. She would never forget Thomas, would never stop carrying him in her heart. But she'd learned that the heart was vast enough to hold both sorrow and joy, both memory and hope, both endings and new beginnings. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of autumn. Inside, the fire burned warm and bright, casting light into every corner. And Catherine Brennan, who had been lost in grief, who had found courage in crisis, who had chosen love over fear, closed her journal and smiled. The past had returned not to haunt her, but to free her, and she was finally, truly free.